This is the Behind the Line podcast, coming to you from the wacky left coast capital of Seattle. News from the Pacific Northwest, the left coast, the U.S., and the world that matters. The stories the MSM won't talk about. Deciphering the truth through all the lies. For more, visit BehindTheLinePodcast.com.
Well, coming to you from Washington, HB 2348 authorizes counties to use county money, levy taxes, and issue bonds to pay, finance, or refinance the cost of, rather than cover the cost of, procuring the site for a hospital, constructing and operating costs and maintenance. Counties may also use county money, levy taxes, and issue bonds for hospital capital gain expenses. The tax a county that establishes a hospital may impose is specified as an additional property tax. In addition to maintenance, the revenue may be used for the operation and capital expenses of the hospital and to pay the principal and interest on bonds issued for such purposes. The tax is not subject to aggregate regular levy rates and is not subject to the 1% levy growth limit for the first year the tax is imposed. County legislative authority is authorized to establish, provide, and maintain hospitals. For this purpose, counties may purchase or lease real property or use county-owned land, erect all necessary buildings, make repairs and improvements, and alter existing buildings for the use of the hospital. Use county money, levy taxes, and issue bonds to raise money to cover the cost of procuring the site of the hospital, constructing and operating the hospital, and for maintaining the hospital. And accept and hold in trust any grant of land, gift, or bequest of money, or any donation for the benefit of the hospital. If a county hospital is established, the county may levy a tax in an amount up to 50 cents per $1,000 of assessed value in any year for the maintenance of the hospital. Okay, well, the staff summary that goes along with this in support of this bill. Harborview Hospital recently proposed a set of renovating and seismic retrofits to modernize the hospital. Before COVID-19, the estimated cost was $1.75 billion. Since then, inflation has taken off. What? Wait a minute. I thought there wasn't any inflation. I thought this was the best economy ever, right? According to the Democrats. Except when they want your tax money. And the project requires an additional $1 billion, so $2.75 billion. Harborview is a gem of a hospital. It is the heart of downtown Seattle, and all communities are experiencing housing crisis. Harborview serves homeless folks by providing $130 million in charity care and an additional $200 million in uncompensated care. 40% of the people who go to Harborview are from outside King County. Harborview is the only Trauma One hospital, not only in Washington, but in the Pacific Northwest. People come from neighboring states for care. Harborview has a partnership with UW. Residents from the school do training at Harborview. Other hospitals have bonding and levy ability that Harborview does not have access to. Any county-owned hospital can fund maintenance, but money cannot be used for operating costs, capital expenses, or debt servicing. The bill is targeted in how it is written, and only King County will be affected because Harborview is the only county-owned hospital at this time. It doesn't say that no other county can make use of this. So at this time, Harborview. Due to the same impact seen by the state, Harborview cannot cover its current costs. There are increased costs stemming from COVID-19, and there is not currently a solution. Harborview does not currently have a dedicated revenue source, and this bill would provide funding for the hospital. Harborview has significant fiscal needs. They are asking the state for operating expenses from the state budget. Communities in King County and outside are in dire need of additional beds. This bill would allow Harborview to expand the number of beds, increased its acute care services. Well, if Harborview wasn't run like the city of Seattle is run, spending $330 million on care that cannot be replenished or paid for, it's not a charity. You're asking the state, who's already said no to property tax increases and this usurps that very rule. Washington State's Constitution limits the regular, non-voted, combined property tax rate that applies to an individual's property to 1% of market value, $10 per thousand. So they just, obviously feel like they can do whatever they want. Interestingly, you have to ask the question, can all taxing districts automatically increase property tax levy by 1%? That's just 1%. No, a taxing district must hold a public meeting and adopt a resolution or ordinance authorizing an increase in the regular property tax as compared to the prior year's actual levy before they can increase their highest lawful levy by the maximum 1.01% levy limit factor. But the state, as always, is always looking to take more of your tax money away to use it for their pet projects, which in this case is serving homeless people, serving illegal immigrants, and other people who can't pay or won't pay. You can't run a business like that. You can't run the government like that. And you can't expect the rest of us who do work to foot the bill for that. Oregon is about to start its next legislative session, and it's shorter than Washington's. Their main focus in Salem, starting next week, will be for lawmakers to reform Measure 110, the voter-approved initiative that decriminalized possession of small amounts of drugs. Democrats have previewed a pretty sweeping bill that will have a big impact on the decriminalization policy, most dramatically because it would end it. Oh, gee, I guess they woke up and saw how much damage that caused in such a short period of time. The proposal top Democrats have put forward would make possession of small amounts of drugs a low-level misdemeanor instead of a violation under current law. Lawmakers say it's a necessary step. They believe police officers need more forceful tools because of the fentanyl crisis. Democrats also want to expand services and try to ensure that people who run across the police are being offered treatment rather than being taken to jail. But the central piece of this debate really will be about whether or not to end Oregon's decriminalization experiment. Well, I think they'd be smart to do so. Plenty of advocacy groups say that would be a huge mistake. Really? You guys don't see all this crime and everything going on? At what point do you wake up and realize that this is the root of all of it? They've seen fatal overdoses in far greater numbers in the state in recent years. They're seeing more public drug use in cities, and police have really been making this case that they don't have enough tools or authority, thanks to the city, to meaningfully curb some of that stuff under Measure 110 as it exists. Democrats for a long time have argued that the state needs time to increase its treatment services and offerings before it thinks about changes to decriminalization. Well, that's just not the case, is it? And I think it's plainly obvious even for the idiots to see. In more news from Oregon, bad news for Republicans, the Oregon Supreme Court has said Thursday that 10 Republican state senators who staged a record-long walkout last year to stall bills on abortion, transgender health, and gun rights cannot run for re-election. This decision upholds the Secretary of State's decision to disqualify the senators from the ballot under a voter-approved measure aimed at stopping such boycotts. Measure 113, passed by voters in 2022, amended the state constitution to bar lawmakers from re-election if they have more than 10 unexcused absences. Last year's boycott lasted 6 weeks, the longest in state history, and paralyzed the legislative session, stalling hundreds of bills. 5 lawmakers sued, but they were among the 10 GOP senators who racked up more than 10 absences. We obviously disagree with the Supreme Court's ruling, said Knopp, one of the Senate minority leader. But more importantly, we are deeply disturbed by the chilling impact this decision will have to crush dissent. Democratic Senate President Rob Wagner welcomed the decision. Of course he did. Democrats already outnumber Republicans in Oregon. It's controlled by Republicans. So, of course, now you've got all these open seats. The question is, who will fill those seats? Will it be Republicans again? Or is it going to be Democrats? These West Coast states, man, left coast states, full control of these whack jobs, and they're just pushing for more ways to control. Elementary and middle school students in Oregon are still struggling to recoup essential learning they lost during the pandemic, according to an analysis by the New York Times. Researchers from Stanford and Harvard found that Oregon was the only state where test scores in reading and math continued to decline even after kids returned to the classrooms. Test scores varied district to district, but the report suggests students in Hillsborough and Salem-Keizer are nearly 2 years behind on math. Wow, all those great decisions they made during the pandemic, right? We're going to take care of our kids and put health as a priority. These kids are suffering, and of course, in and around Portland mostly, in and around Salem mostly, where all these wackos make all these decisions that make no sense whatsoever. Just left those kids out to dry, didn't provide the materials they needed to get the schoolwork done, didn't worry about kids that had no access to internet. But is there any sort of repercussions for these decisions? Is anybody holding them accountable for that? Not really. In California, they've agreed to settle a $2 billion lawsuit about education during the pandemic. In California, around 10,000 public schools were closed during the pandemic, impacting around 6 million students. We know in California there were between 800,000 and 1 million kids who had no digital access whatsoever for 18 and 19 months. It doesn't mean they got a bad education. It means they got no education. And there were other problems. Second graders in Oakland, when COVID hit, their teacher held class in 2019 and 2020 only 2 times. Other plaintiffs reported a lack of computer equipment, broken equipment, and teachers not trained to cope with the technology or the challenges of remote learning. First grade at one school, 2020 to 2021, 33 kids and just one teacher on Zoom. I mean, everybody saw the writing on the wall for this, right? Like, those of us with any common sense, anyway. The proposal for this change, this money has to be invested in the schools. It's not going to the parents. Changes that administration believes are appropriate at this stage coming out of the pandemic to focus use of these one-time dollars on the students who are most impacted and continue to need support. Provisions of the bill still must be enacted into law by the state legislature. Direct school districts to use extended days, tutors, and mental health professionals to help these kids. California agreed to this $2 billion to help the children impacted the most to recover from lost learning and the mental health impact caused by schools closed during the pandemic. The federal government's already granted public school districts more than $190 billion between March 2020 and 21 for that purpose. But the plaintiffs in this suit argued that in California, the state failed to ensure local districts targeted the money for students who needed the most help. You got to wonder what these guys were thinking about. These politicians standing there telling us that kids are resilient and they'll be okay. Obviously not. You've got Oregon in last place for their kids. California suffering. I know Washington kids are suffering still as well. California lawmakers announced the nation's first set of reparation bills on Wednesday, with legislation that would require the state to recognize and apologize for systematic racism against black residents for nearly 2 centuries. The 14 proposed bills tackle a wide range of areas of discrimination, from mass incarceration to housing segregation, but do not include any financial compensation for descendants of longtime black residents affected by the legacy of slavery, the most controversial recommendation to emerge from California's previous reparations task force. There were no slaves in California during the Civil War. These people that somehow claim that their life is affected by their ancestors from the South during that time are full of it. While many only associate direct cash payments with reparations, the true meaning of the word to repair involves much more, Lori Wilson, a state assembly member and the chair of the California Legislative Black Caucus, said in a statement announcing the legislation. Wilson said the reparations package offered a comprehensive approach to dismantling the legacy of slavery and systematic racism. California's Reparations Task Force, formed in the wake of the nationwide racial justice protests in 2020 that followed the police killing of George Floyd in Minneapolis, released a 500-page report in 2022 documenting more than 170 years of state-sanctioned racism against black residents, and followed it with a 1,100-page report in 2023 that included a long list of potential ways the state could redress and repair these historic wrongs, including individual cash payments, because it's always about the money. It has nothing to do with anything else. And you watch, there's going to be a bunch of outcry about these bills that they don't do anything. The reports attribute the enduring wealth gap between black and white Americans to generations of atrocities in nearly every sector of civil society, including segregation, racial terror, and harmful racist neglect. The first step of its reparations package would be a resolution, ACR 135, that recognizes how laws in California were crafted to directly cause harm to its black residents. Yep, I'm sure that was the intent. And that it would be followed by a bill requesting a formal apology by California's governor and its legislature for the role California played in human rights violations against African slaves and their descendants. Other bills include some sweeping measures and many smaller ones, responding to the increased attention to how black Californians' property was repeatedly seized by local governments without proper compensation. One bill would restore property taken during race-based uses of eminent domain to its original owners, or provide other effective remedy where appropriate, such as restitution or compensation. Another would amend the California Constitution to prohibit involuntary servitude for incarcerated persons, so you can't put prisoners to work. Other bills would prohibit discrimination against natural hairstyles in competitive sports, require that grocery stores in underserved communities provide public notification before they close. Maybe you should prevent theft at those stores if you don't want them to close, huh? Block the state's prison system from banning books without review, and create grant programs to expand access to career technical education in STEM fields, and to fund community-driven solutions to decrease community violence in African American communities. I just think this is nuts. Absolutely harebrained nuts. They're going to end up getting money, guarantee. 75% of black California voters supported reparation payments. California is going to put itself bankrupt trying to take care of this problem that they didn't create, that they don't owe anybody an apology for. They don't owe anybody anything. Nobody in this time is owed anything for whatever happened in the 17 and 1800s. Sorry. You have every opportunity to do something with your life now, and if you don't, that's on you. There are consequences for your actions. No matter how much the Democrats try to tell you there isn't. All these great people, all these prisoners they're so concerned about. Well, in Riverside County, California, a 200-person inmate riot at their facility triggered a threat assessment at every prison in California on Wednesday. The uproar started at Ironwood State Prison, which is about 22 miles away from the Arizona border, about 10 a.m., as guards escorted inmates across the yard during a contraband investigation. It escalated into a riot when the prisoner headbutted one of the staff members, as an estimated 200 other prisoners rushed the guards, striking them with fists and rocks, according to the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. Yeah, how's that rehabilitation working out for you? The prisoners refused to comply with the guards' orders to bring the riot to an end. Officers had to deploy chemical agents and fired off a warning shot as well as non-lethal impact rounds. I bet they'll be in trouble. There'll be a big investigation and officers will be fired for that. 8 staff members and 1 prisoner required hospitalization and were moved to another facility. CDCR staff said the riot caused a 24-hour modified programming protocol for all yards and day rooms in facilities throughout California. This is what you get when you let the animals have all the rights. And no doubt, like I said, some prison guards are going to lose their jobs over the way they had to act to take control back of the prison. And no doubt the prisoners will get all kinds of new rights and leniencies and ability to do things that they shouldn't do because they're in prison. But this will bring out all the kooks to stand up for these prisoners and everything that they need to be able to do. You could not make this stuff up.
Thank you for listening to the Behind the Line podcast. If you like this broadcast, please like and share it. Please follow us on Facebook, Rumble, YouTube, Twitter, Truth Social, Telegram, Gab, Parler, and LinkedIn. You can find our podcast at BehindTheLinePodcast.com, NetNewsNetwork.net, and on Anchor, Spotify, Amazon Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, TuneIn, and anywhere podcasts can be found. Thank you for your support.